Okay, this is Ania Lian, your unit lecturer. This particular unit combines all units that are about projects. So these are EMG 506, 7, 8, and 609. Students from the unit 609 don't have to listen to this production. They may work exclusively with their mentors. However, if you think that you need some additional help, or if you would like to consult an additional help, by all means engage in collaborate classes. For my personal reasons, I have a very old mother who lives on her own. For the next few weeks, I am still in Europe, so we will have online classes only. I also feel that a lot of you are online only, so it may not make much difference to you. Okay, so what's happening? I might just move on to this slide first. When you open your LearnLine for your units, you will find out that they are constructed in relation to 3 stages of learning or project development. That's the same thing, which is framing, engagement, and futures. Myself, I give to each of them 4 weeks, although I know that Susho, who wrote those units, was not quite sure whether 4 was enough, and she played with the weeks, sometimes giving to the framing stage 3 weeks, which is why assignment 1 is due in 3 weeks. Then engagement had more weeks, and futures whatever. Now, because I am not so stringent with the deadlines for assignments, I am very happy to actually stick to 4 for each of those stages, and you will submit your assignments accordingly when you're ready. I'm also old enough to know that some of you will submit on time as scheduled by LearnLine. Some of you will simply submit the whole thing in week 13 or 14 and will not submit assignments like 1 and 2 on the way. I'm happy with it too. Now, what may not work, however, despite of my flexibility, is when I don't hear from you and have never been given a chance to comment on your drafts, that you may submit your assignment in week 14, 15, and it may be written superbly. And I had cases like this before. However, because the student didn't consult me, those assignments sometimes end up written uncritically. And unfortunately, it then has an impact on the final grade. So believing that you know how to develop your assignment, you might have even had some experience in publications and so on, we still have to be humble. I am humble, and you will see some bits of that humility today when I explain to you some things. I'm always humble, and I know that one of our students, Robert, participated in my EMG 506 on-campus meetings last semester, although he was not enrolled in the unit, just for the fun of it. And if he listens today to this class, he will see it's done a little bit differently. Every semester I change things, because as I grow and as I change, so that's the way in which I teach. And therefore you can see that I try to be critical of my own thinking all the time, and also the way how I interact with students and teach students. So humility, it's a good thing. I personally am not that humble. If you want to know, I'm probably less humble than most of my students who didn't actually get good grades. And that's why I'm very aware of the need to be humble, because we can very easily get swayed by our emotions, beliefs, by experiences we've had. But this is a master coursework, which is the lowest level of postgraduate study, the first level of postgraduate study, which means that we are learning, we are not applying as yet, right? I mean, if you did a PhD, you'd be still learning. And if you are as old as me and taught these units forever, you will still be learning, right? So we never finish to learn. But especially in this unit, we must remember to be humble and to learn. So, as I often say, do not get married to your text, to your ideas, to your drafts. It's a very good principle, because when we get too confident about ourselves, what happens is we block questions. And when we block questions, we not only block our own development, which might not be too bad, but depending on your job, and most of our students are school teachers or school principals, were paid by the taxpayers not to be blocked. So, just a little advice that I actually listened to when I started my postgraduate studies from my mentors. So I'm sharing it with all my students because it did have an impact on me. I learned not to, when I wrote something, to take a distance to it. No matter how much I believed in the value of what I wrote, it was definitely valuable, it just wasn't that good. So it could have been improved, and even my PhD could be improved when I look at it today. So that's that. So we have those three stages. We're learning to be humble and more things. All the units other than the thesis units, right? All the units 506, 507, 508 and 609 are about the literature. So we are not allowed to collect data. There are two reasons for it. The first one is time. By the time you explore the literature, sorry for this noise, someone is building something. So by the time you explore the literature, develop your ethics application, by the time the ethics committee comes back to you, precious weeks are gone, and students very often would not finish on time. So basically the first reason is time, and the second reason is sometimes we believe in our empirical results way too fast, and because it is the first stage of doing research, I think it really is good for our students to study the literature, get acquainted with texts, develop some strategies for reading critically. I'm sure that you do, but maybe there is more. As you will see from the lesson today, what I will do is to push you a little bit to examine your concepts, to examine the way you believe that you could structure, the ways in which you believe you could structure your assignments in this unit. So, yes, we will be actually trying to get more critical, get more expanded, get more information, and the value of our research or of our assignments will be exactly in that. We will produce texts that will provide theoretical value for others, or even for you one day, to develop it further into maybe some empirical research. But we need to know the literature, we need to know what concepts mean, we need to know how to work with concepts and so on. And a lot of that is first a matter of being able to work with the literature, because depending how you understand the concepts, obviously, you will set up your empirical research differently, and you will interpret your own methodology and your own findings differently. The more knowledgeable you are, the more systematic you are, the more likely your research, your empirical research one day is likely to produce good information, reliable information. And you've studied some other units before you came to the project units, and you know that that's exactly what's missing in a number of studies, which is the interpretive frameworks, the theorizing, the detailed analysis, what we know, how we know things, how we got them to begin with, what did we consider, what we didn't consider, right? So now we know in these units we will not be collecting data, we will be actually learning about the things that are important to know before we actually embark on collecting data. So so to summarize this brief introduction, other than the unit EMG 609, all other units have 3 assignments. LearnLine paces you through those assignments. I am flexible about the deadlines. I will try not to assess you harshly, if at all, on assignment 1 or 2. Probably I don't assess assignment 1 or 2. I will just assess the whole research paper that you will produce and submit as assignment 3. Okay, that will give you an opportunity to submit assignment 1 and assignment 2, get feedback from me, send me some drafts before, submit those assignments, assignment 1 and 2, get feedback from me on those, and then produce in week 13, 14, 15 just the whole research paper, and that's the research paper on which you will get the final grade. As I said, I do it specifically because I want you to go back and forth in your assignment rather than and be able to actually make changes to your introductory statements, to your methodology statement as you are actually working with data, right? So everybody, when we do the literature review, we go back and forth to different to different sections of the paper, and I want to encourage this. So the final grade, or the only grade, is the final grade on assignment 3, which has to have all the 3 pieces, right? The framing, the engagement, and the futures, not just the futures. Okay, so what's next? So in the class today, we try to actually help ourselves with the framing concepts. How do you frame a study? I will help you with this in detail, but before I go to that stage of our class, let me talk to you about some discussion we had that I failed to record today on using Collaborate, because I did. So one of our students, Fiona, is doing a project on literacy. Fiona is doing actually this large unit 609, but her problems are exactly the same problems as you will have in project 1, project 2, and project 3 units. So what Fiona is looking at is as follows. In her outfit, wherever she works, university created this academic literacy course, which is a diploma course, and that enables students to actually move on to enroll in the university. However, in her experience, some students that are in this program do not enroll. Some do, some don't. So she wonders, what could it be, right? So here we have kind of the area of her study is academic. You see how it's important to, I don't know where this R came from, academic literacy support in diploma courses at her institution. And she's thinking now, she wants to study resilience, well-being, success, so she throws these concepts. Now you have to be very careful when you throw them, and it goes like this. It's important to throw them right there and just for your mentor or for me to think about it. Because if we study resilience, how resilience is addressed in those academic literacy support courses, we need to know exactly how we will define resilience and whether resilience, as defined as we did, is a factor that determines whether some students will enroll or some might not. Now, that would require an extensive amount of research analysis, so that could be good to do as well. Right? So, well being is a very low resolution word. Low resolution, very little information is about in it, so you still would have to define the limits of the angle from which you address the concept of well-being or the concept of success. So we talked about it a little bit, right? So what she says, why is it that some students push through difficulty and why others don't? And then we talked a little bit more, and what we actually decided that what Fiona meant by all of this is push through difficulty, meaning enroll in university courses as a result of having completed that particular diploma. Right. So one thing we know that if a course is providing literacy support, we have particular concepts to study that are already present in that subject, academic literacy support. There's a number of things which are already present just in that topic that Fiona identified as relevant for her. Now, you could stop the video and think for yourself what they are. But definitely literacy, right? Academic literacy, it's another one. And maybe rather than just literacy, let's have a look. Literacy, well, then we can separate them, we don't have to, but say academic literacy is one. Support is another, right? Because support means what? Opportunities to succeed. Just because a course says, the heading of a course says, we are an academic literacy support program. Just because they say they are support, it doesn't mean that they actually provide support, right? We all know. We all have done language courses where the teacher did everything so that we wouldn't learn the language that we were studying. We've done courses where the teacher did everything, right, in his or her means. So the support itself in the heading doesn't mean that they actually provide support. So that's something to investigate. What's academic literacy? What it means to support academic literacy. And also, we have another concept, which is the diploma courses. And what is it that we have here? Learning outcomes, right? For the program. So let's create a sentence now. What we have is an academic literacy program was devised by a particular university that is framed within selected learning outcomes that have been identified as enabling students once reached, enabling students to have the capacity to function in academic courses, in regular academic courses. So learning outcomes is what you have to know or be able to demonstrate, right? Learning outcomes are always about demonstrating. So we've got the learning outcomes of the program, We have a question of support of academic literacy. Now we have something, right? We have where are we going, something to analyze, and something to analyze. Now, my suggestion to Fiona, of course, was, as I explained in the beginning of this video, that we do not collect any data. What we might do is take information that is publicly available, like the learning outcomes of the program, examine what academic literacy is, what best ways there are in literature to support academic literacy, and examine it critically. So that's something that we will need to think about in week 2 and week 3, maybe week 4, right? Something like this, we will have to sort of work out how to do it. But at this very moment, it's enough to say that. So what support? The question here is, what support? What is quality support? What is the quality support that those academic literacy programs can provide for students to meet the learning outcomes designated by academic institutions for students enrolled in those academic literacy diploma courses? Here you go, you've got the title of the assignment, you see? So a little bit of a discussion, and all of a sudden this resilience, well-being, and so on, which are very good navigating concepts, got us to the point that actually what we're saying is we want students to succeed, and the succeed is measured with their confidence to move on. But before they have a confidence to move on, and before we can actually blame anyone or identifying phenomena, let's have a look whether we actually give students the possibility to succeed, right? It's not that they have a confidence or not. It's like, did we do everything for them to have that confidence? So before you actually collect empirical data, do your questionnaires and God knows what else, to find out whether students are like this or like that, let's have a look at what is it that a good academic literacy support would look like if we were to account for those specific learning outcomes. And that's a wonderful research, because then the academic institution of Fiona can personalize this research and look at it and ask themselves, do we do that? And new projects can emerge from that reflection, including at some stage maybe also collecting empirical data. It is my personal view, and I believe that these units in our course were also designed along similar thoughts, that too quickly we want data and not enough maybe time we spend learning about about the ways we think, right? So this is a good thing, a good project, very useful for her organization, without actually necessitating Fiona to collect, to do the ethics and confront her own colleagues about the pedagogy. They can do it themselves, especially once they have an assignment which will detail concepts, issues, things to consider that are important for a quality academic literacy support program. Okay, so we did that, and then we looked at Julia. Julia is a STEM expert. Well, at least she manages, or is a leader of a STEM teaching program, and she wants to look at technology. Now, everybody looks at technology, the question is why? This is an important question, and when you write your project and when you actually develop your context of background of the study and all of that, you need to actually know why, because the disturbance or sorry, I used some theoretical words, the problem that you will be tackling might actually relate directly to the expectations that we have of technology, right? What expectations are there of technology? Now, when we discussed it, there were ideas mentioned that maybe just we want to use technology because it is there, right? So we should. Well, I don't know. And then I was a little bit facetious because of my terrible character. I wrote, well, okay, sheriff stars are in shops. Should we use them too? This is not to be nasty. This is just it's a trick. It's a linguistic trick. It has a name for it, but I don't remember the name for it, for that operation. But in order to find the truth value or the relevance value or something of things, you replace one word with another, and you then can see it in a different context. And in that sense, it might help you look at your own thinking differently. So if we should use technology because it's there, why not anything else? You know? So there. So I came up with this a little bit of an explanation. When I was being introduced to the use of technology in education, I was introduced by people who actually were pioneers of the field. And the way that technology actually came up as an issue in education was because what do we know about technology? Well, a couple of things. I have written a paper on it. So my name, and maybe in brackets, if you write new learning, you'll find it on Google. Not in brackets, in inverted commas. So you write Ania Lian in inverted commas, and then you write in inverted commas new learning, and you'll find it. It's going to be on Google somewhere. So what technology does, it has it's got a number of features, right? You can connect computers, that's communication, so that's one thing, right? What else? It stores information. Okay, technology allows us to store information. It also allows us to find things at random. Oh my goodness. Can you program your the way you organize your resources online in such a way that it enables students to find information at random, but not at random in a sense that in unpredictable combinations, yet they are useful for the students. Now, this is a very complex thing for you if you're a beginner in that area to grapple with, but to summarize it conceptually is as follows. When you have those teaching approaches where the teacher guides students, right? What do we call it? Scaffolding or something. You have a teacher that kind of is a middleman between the learning outcomes and the student's brain, right? The question always I have, and I've written my PhD on it. How do you know that you help students answer the questions that they actually have on their mind? You can't assume it. There is no framework that would allow you to do that, because if you did have this framework, you would have a Nobel Prize today. So but if you set up a system in such a way which is so sensitive and so smartly devised that students can find answers to their own questions, that's different. And that's an angle on the use of technology in education that got lost, in my view. Oh, well, I'm not saying that there isn't an island here and an island there, but people actually work on it and do amazing things. Absolutely. But as a field, the use of technology in education became kind of hijacked by simple concepts like, oh, let's do some games. I'll put them on Google. Right. I'm saying these things for you to consider, and for Julia, for example, who wants to consider technology, is to ask herself, Why technology? What are the expectations of technology that you see that technology is important for its integration into your um, classes, right? You need to actually defend it somehow. So that's extremely important. The issue is very complex. If you wanted to be as detailed as I would love you to be, we would never finish these assignments, because obviously there's a concept of feedback. Then you have to actually look into the concept of feedback and what is feedback and did they get it right. You need to look at it critically. So if you want to do these things, then rather than try to answer the question of how to use technology in language learning or in STEM or in literacy, what you might want to do is actually go back a little bit, retract, reduce your ambitions, and maybe have a look technology and feedback. Because if technology supports to help students find answers to their own questions, so what's the relationship between technology and feedback? And what is feedback you would want to examine? And then when you retract back a little bit, then it allows you to ask those more detailed questions, and as a result you can actually truly contribute to your own thinking and the thinking of your organizations. But if we actually want to solve those big problems, how technology can be used in STEM, well, we bypass so many middle steps that yes, it still could be a good assignment, but I still, as an assessor of it, I will have to close my eyes a little bit, the little things that on the way somehow were pushed aside and not explained, like for example the concept of feedback. A feedback is what the teacher tells students and what the student finds, right? Well, can we think about it a little bit more systematically so that we can tell the feedback from no feedback? I'm asking these questions. These questions are research questions. If we say, well, we all know it and there's no point of splitting hairs, well, that's not an attitude of a researcher. We never know, right? People, continuously test Einstein, continuously test what might be assumed we know, right? So, and we're here to learn those techniques, because when you are back in your organization after you finish masters, you have to develop that. In my view, it is worthwhile if you develop this kind of watchful eye, that you pay attention. That little question in your soul emerges when someone runs with this magnificently fluent speech, especially if you hire Americans. I mean, I think Americans are born. They do something to those Americans. Nobody speaks like the Americans do. Like, they can talk underwater, under concrete. They just can't talk. And so they all, I've never met an American who stumbled or whatever. They're just so smooth, beautiful, and they can sell you anything. So yes, to avoid those moments where we actually shove under the carpet a lot of concepts only to move on with the big question, I think we can actually you can use your mentors, or you can use me to actually go back a little bit and stop yourself from asking too big a question for these assignments, and actually try to solve smaller problems. So that if you learn the technique of solving smaller problems, you might actually, once you finish 1, 2, or 3 assignments, you might actually start learning how to do the technique for solving slightly bigger problems, and you also will have more information. So that's what I would suggest. So what else did we do in class? We did funny things. I'll show you what funny things we did. We did really funny things. So that's not that. That's the funny thing. Now this looks really funny, right? Oh well, that's not that funny. That's something else. Just move somewhere else. Where is it? I hope I didn't close it. This is where we were. Okay. So these are funny terms here. So where does it come from? I have produced a paper which is called Reading for Emotion, right? I'm not going to teach you anything about this paper. I just have to tell you where it comes from. Reading for Emotion. I did a number of things in this paper. It's available online, but sometimes it is easier available online, sometimes not. So if you do inverted commas, which means that the Google will look just for that phrase, and then you do Ania Lian, You could be lucky to find the paper or not. Or if you really, really are dying to have this paper, just send me an email. But anyway, I did in this paper a number of things, and I developed a technique. And part of this technique we will use today to actually learn how to write our assignment. So in week 3, give and take 3 weeks, you're expected to sort of have a draft of assignment 1, which is produced an introduction to your research paper, some talk about its significance, and also identify the methodology that you will use in order to actually explore the literature, and link it to your introduction and significance so that it is all coherent. Good, so that's great. So what we did actually, and I really, really mind that we didn't record it. So this paper is actually, this little template, call it template, what will we call it? An exercise sheet is actually available to you on the announcement. But let me help you a little bit with the reading of it. So basically what I claim, that each text, doesn't matter whether it's a poetry or whatever, has 6 stages of it has 6 stages. So if it's an abstract or it's a whole paper or whatever, has 6 stages of in its structure. It always has them, and if it doesn't have them, it's badly constructed. Now it doesn't mean that it has to have 6 sentences or 6 sections. Sometimes one stage can be within 2 stages can be within 1 sentence. So it depends what it is, right? But it has to have those 6 elements, otherwise it's useless. It's badly done. Now I could be wrong, but we've been analyzing now text for a while with my PhD students, and so far so good. And it applies to everything. So this is not the time to actually teach it, unless some of you want to do research paper on that. That would be great. That's like my baby thing. All right. So some of you who actually have a background in literacy, some of those stages you will recognize perfectly well. So you set the focus, then there's a conflict. I call it disturbance because I created these stages independently of the literacy thing, so I called it with my own names, and for some reason I like them better. So setting focus, then disturbance, then there has to be a dialogue. Like people talk about things. There's this disturbance, and then there are perspectives. Like, oh my goodness, did you know that? And I spoke to this person, spoke to this person, and then I also read and there's a dialogue of sorts. Then you need to systematize those perspectives, right? Your methodology, I call it development. How did the paper actually develop? Never mind what that means. So methodology is how the paper develops. You just say, we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this. Resolution. So what happened? Right? And the moral of the story is, usually people get it wrong. And usually people get the moral wrong because they put in their own bias. So in my discussion with my students today in the collaborate session, what I said is where the bias goes wrong is very often it's like this, the researcher says, oh, we did this research on student empowerment, and like think of some sort of slogan words there whereby the students were doing these amazing things, and the moral of the story is they need more grammar. Like, never in the paper anyone looked at grammar per se or at all, and it just from nowhere, it's the word that was never actually present in any of the text above, and definitely say in the abstract of the paper, and all of a sudden this thing comes up like from nowhere. It's because it's the bias of the researcher, and especially researchers in Southeast Asia, they only want to study more vocabulary and more grammar for the last 200 years, if not longer. Like, can we move on? No, because the field, what marks a field, especially if you study Pierre Bourdieu, what marks a field is its power. It draws things to its center, right? And what it means, that it has its own power center. And if you want to be in the field of education, you have to be part of that power center. Try to escape it. Then you are in a different field. But you still want to have your degree in education. So you have a problem. How do you deal with that power center while doing innovation, which actually keeps you a little bit on the fringes? And you don't want to be on the fringes because it's too risky. Maybe nobody will understand you or love you or whatever, right? So people will be scared of these things. So we have a problem. So anyway, as a result, 200 years ago, people spoke about grammar and vocabulary lists, and I can bet everything I own that some of you who are literacy and language teachers are still reading stuff and hearing people talking about vocabulary lists and grammar. So wonderful research followed by 200-year-old conclusion. So it's very important to learn how to avoid these traps. So what do we have here? So in relation to assignment 1, you are required by this unit to finish the introductory parts of the assignment. Now, obviously I expect you that in week 10 you will actually redo them again, right? You will make them tighter, neater, nicer, expand some things, right? And I want you to do that, right? So once you finish this, I don't want you to see it as a closed book, because if you want to make changes, by all means, you are assessed again on the last piece of the work, which includes all the research assignment, not just a piece. So how will we go about completing assignment 1? I know that in your assessment description it says proposal. Those proposal words are a little bit dangerous, so we're not going to do a proposal. What we will do is actually write an abstract at the same time as you actually will write your introduction, your significance, your aims, and your methodology. Okay, so we're writing the assignment already at the same time as we're writing the abstract. Why? Well, for 2 reasons. Abstract is shorter, right? It's easier to write it, in a sense. Also, when you write abstract, what you do, you have an opportunity to check what you've written in the abstract and what you've written in your assignment, the body of the assignment, right? So you can see whether the ideas are actually the same. Then you change the abstract or you change your introductory pieces. They need to align, they need to be coherent, and abstract helps you to focus, right? Because sometimes we read this introduction, it just flows so beautifully, and you started in Poland and you finish somewhere on Saturn for no reason. Whereas if you write an abstract at the same time, or maybe even first, what happens is you actually then, if you write an introduction, I'll just sort of start talking to you about it, and then I'll go deeper into it. If this is part of your abstract, then in your introduction you write, more words on this particular part of your abstract. Then, if this is the problem statement, that this is what the things you want to examine, well, you've got it in the abstract. Now you can write your page or 2 on that particular issue, right? You have it written in a brief way. Now you can actually expand it. And if you have your significance, so you have it in a brief way, you can then expand it, and the methodology, you actually set it to yourself how you will do it, and then you can write it, expand it, and write in more detail in your assignment. So abstract and the body of the text come together. Sometimes I myself write abstract before I write the paper. It's extremely important to have that interaction between these 2 pieces. I know that very often people don't do it. They find writing abstracts very difficult, and that's largely because the paper was not focused well. Oh, it happened to me. It probably still does. And that's the thing. Now, when you look at this table here, I will explain it to you shortly, but one of the things talking about being humble, I wanted to say to you, the right column took me up to 1 o'clock in the morning to write it, which clearly shows to you that I didn't write it while asleep and sort of, not paying attention. It was difficult, and I wrote something here, then I wrote something here, then I went back to here. I'll give you an example that I gave to our students in the online class. See here that I wrote about reading critically in English. Well, it's here. I think I have it here, but I definitely don't have a word about reading critically in the methodology section. You would think you would have it, and you will in your extended version probably. But in the methodology version, I noticed I didn't have a word. So I went back and I started checking and checking. And because you see, these are bits of the abstract. In your abstract, you will have this, and you will put it here. Then, I lost it, right? Then you take this and you add it here. So it will be a whole the collection of all these stages, right? Then you take this bit and you will add to it. And by the time you do all of that, you'll find out that your abstract is a bit longish. Don't despair, because we haven't finished the paper yet, right? What we're doing is writing an extended abstract, and then you will have this is for assignment 1. And for assignment 2, what you need then is findings. It will be part of your abstract, and the moral of the paper. So it will be part of the abstract. So far we have 300 words. By the time you finish this extended abstract, it will be 400 words, maybe 500. Obviously it's not an abstract, it's too long, right? Well, by the time you finish the long abstract and you understand the bits and pieces and they read well together, you can reduce it to 300 in no time, or 250, right? Because you can reduce it, but it's written nicely and you understand it. So the reason why I don't have in the methodology section here, methodology section of the abstract, not of the text itself, of the abstract, the word critical reading, it's because it would be implied, right? The abstract, because it talks about critical reading, it just is implied, and I checked it whether it reads well, and I still corrected some things and so on. But anyway, I invented it last night, and it was a long process and so on. So it's a kind of a template for you how to go about starting to work with assignment 1, and how to on the basis of readings specify your focus, on the basis of readings specify the problem, and as you read you write those bits and pieces into the sections. You might even call your sections at the moment setting focus on disturbance, and then when you're done you will call this introduction, significance, or whatever it is called, problem statement, significance, you can call it whatever, right? Later on, once you finish writing up all these sections. But for argument's sake, just in the beginning, you could stick with those titles for your assignment so that you can see where they are in your abstract and how they correlate to the text in the body of your assignment. All right, so a little bit more on that. I will not read you through this because you can read the stuff yourselves. But what I will say is as follows. A PhD student of mine, before he met me, he wrote a publication. That's how you get scholarships. You need to publish your stuff so that someone then sees that you can do research, and they will pay you scholarships to do PhDs. Anyway, so he wrote stuff. I already corrected his very, very poor abstract in that old publication, right? I already corrected. So this is already a corrected stuff, corrected abstract, which I actually split into those stages for us to. Did it have a moral? It might have had a moral. All right. So I already split it. And then last night I sat down And I thought, will I teach you this? And then I started to notice this, even though I corrected this for my student. And I corrected in such a way so but not to move away from the paper. I just corrected the abstract, not the entire paper. So when I looked at it last night, I thought, oh my goodness. I knew it was bad, but it really, really needed a lot of improvement. So as Julia, I think, and also Fiona noticed, we have policies, right? We have challenges here implied. Well, none of that is present in the focus, right? Forget about the feeling. That actually goes into my reading for emotion model. So you don't have to worry about this. What it does say is the way you word it, it has an intention. Do you want to enthuse it that your reader? What intention do you have? So depending on the intention you have, you frame your text differently. Do you want to intrigue them? Do you want to enthuse them? Do you want to appall them? Do you want to what? Connect to the reader? Everybody knows that this is required. All teachers everywhere have been doing this, and it's been a standard practice in teaching. You're connecting, right? So you want to connect. So depending what emotion you want to evoke in your readers, you actually frame your text here differently, right? If you want to insult your friend, you say hello to them differently than if you want to express your respect to them or love, right? So, intention kind of has an emotional basis, and then depending on that emotion you want to evoke with them, you use different devices. So that's what it is. I was just trying to speculate myself what emotions he was trying to evoke in the reader. But anyway, you can ignore it because it was my student's stuff, so that. But anyway, as you can see, the policies are missing. And the kind of, we could have put this, the policies are in place. I could actually, take this and move it here, because it's already kind of pinching, it's already signaling the problem. Policies are in place, but how do Indonesian English language language teaching, that's why it should be like this, English language teaching academics go about embracing the change, right? That's a disturbance. So it should be here. You see, even when I teach, I make changes. So mistakes are never made by people who don't work and don't think, right? If you follow someone to a T, you never make mistakes. You just might end up with them in the gurgler, or you might end up a professor with them as they are, which often happens, but it won't be any difference whether someone studies with you or with someone else, because you are just like everybody else. So this is my personal view on academia and on the ethics of work. I think that we study in order to actually understand what we're doing, as opposed to just follow other people. So being humble, making mistakes is fine. So you see, I just shifted that thing because the policies are in place, but how do so it already signals the problem, right? So it should be actually in the disturbance section, in the conflict section. Where's the conflict? So I didn't, so newspapers articles were chosen because they present to students problem. So sure, but we don't know from what perspective is this the problem. Is it like because the teachers cannot teach it presents the problem, or because the resources are poor it presents the problem? Where is the problem, right? So because there is no policy here, we don't really know where's this problem with reading newspapers really coming from. He makes an assumption it's a foreign stuff. Well, but if you have good teacher, foreign or not, they should be able to deal with it. So what's the problem? Why can't they deal with it just because it's foreign? I mean, I have a foreign accent and you guys are coping pretty well, right? So what's the problem? What's really the problem? The student is not focusing really well because there's no policy here. We don't really know. We don't really know what matters and how to connect what matters with the problem. You see, according to research, we're connecting now with the challenge to address the change in policies in Indonesia. Looks like that everybody is in trouble. Oh my goodness. Right? So there. Then what the student did in his abstract, what he did was he just said, oh my goodness, there's this guy, he's very important holiday, like 1969, like goodness gracious, is there anything else sort of newer? But anyway, so he has holiday here, and this is dialogue is usually between people, right? So dialogue is about what perspectives you will engage, what voices doesn't mean necessarily what people will talk. It's like what perspectives, what approaches, what perspectives from teachers, perspectives from the literature, perspectives from approaches, right? So don't think of voices as human beings because they have a throat, but voice is a perspective. So dialogue engages perspectives. What perspectives are engaged? This is like mono perspective. It's just holiday here. The concepts of the reader text and context will be looked at solely from the perspective of holiday. Holiday, it's holiday here, holiday here. So is it gonna be a monologue? If you have a monologue, if you only see black, how do you know it's black? Right? So it's not research. So that's why I have this dialogue stage here, because very often we forget, even in units, how we teach, when we teach people. For example, when we teach academic literacy, and we have found it with my students, or in fact, I had a student who just submitted his PhD, well, not just, a few months ago, and we've analyzed how lecturers in English language departments were teaching English in Indonesia. And for example, if we were to use this abstract, what happens if a teacher was exposed to Halliday's method for teaching reading? Then that teacher used that method to teach reading to his students. And you'd think, what's wrong with it? Well, what we found out, what was wrong with that, is that students couldn't see the value of that method because there was no other method. There was no other approaches integrated with it so that they could compare and contrast and see the power or evaluate the power of those approaches, and as a result do two things: critically approach the method of teaching reading by that particular lecturer, and also on their body experience how the impact of these different things on them and what they will be doing when they are in schools themselves. Now, obviously the course has only 12 weeks or so on how to do it. Well, we found a way how to do it, and there are ways to do it, and I don't want to explain it now because it's not the place for it. But to cut the very long story short, we have here one perspective. So there's no dialogue, there's only monologue. So I was thinking, what would I do if I was to write this abstract, extended abstract, before I actually reduce it to something reasonable like 200 words? Well, with online students, we looked at it, and I said to students, well, we have here what seems to be also one voice, because it's the new English reading curricula developed by teachers. Sorry, that word wasn't there. That's a clue. So the new English curricula developed by teachers, and the impact of the implementation of those newly developed curricula. What is very interesting, because that's developed by the teacher and that's developed by the teacher, so it's kind of like a monolingual. But as our students in our course noted, we have a second voice, which is those new standards, right? So we're looking at what the interpretations of we're looking at the new curricula from the perspectives on the standards. So now we can compare how they made meaning of those standards and how they applied them, because there could be dissonance between what people say here and what standards are, or also between what people say here and what people actually do. And obviously we have also students, right? So that's another voice. So that's interesting. Now we have three voices actually. We have standards, we have teachers, and then we have teachers, and then we have the students. And then we have our own voice, because we will be doing the evaluation. That's cute. And then we have methodology, which is, all right, so we have all these voices, which actually, the significance of a study, that's why I call it the significance, comes from the voices you engage. Because when we look at how they interpret in relation to curricula, how they actually turn it into practice, and what impact it is the significance, because it shows us what the challenges that they might have, or and also the obstacles they have overcome, and also how the students find themselves. What's the benefit for the students in all of that? So it's the significance of the study. That's why I call it the dialogue, the significance. So we confront perspectives, and that confrontation is the significance of the study. Now, we weren't quite sure holiday is already significant, so we couldn't really learn what's so significant about the study. Yeah, currently Halley is acknowledged to best capture these dynamics, and the study tested explanatory power in relation to what? Now, it's written by a foreign student, which means that very often they use words which feel good, but yeah. But anyway, explanatory power to students, right? Or their power, maybe not explanatory power, but their power, right? But in relation to what? So we had a student in the conference who said, I've done the research using Halliday's method, and I analyzed the outcomes of the research in relation to the criteria that Halliday provides. If this is not being incestuous, I don't know what it is. You need independent criteria, and here we got it from the standards. Of course, there's another element. It's a bit more complex. But as I said, every research has to be pushed back a little bit before you do the major study. But I just didn't deal with it in this particular abstract. I just left it there because there's one more step, which is how you interpret the standards in relation to what interpretive framework of standards do you have to actually work with the standards. Now, that's a question that should have been developed in this study first, but I didn't say that because I just went with the flow. And maybe it could be assumed that in this particular study they have an interpretive framework. I develop interpretive framework because I work with my students in my teacher education courses. So I have to have an interpretive framework. So maybe they had an interpretive framework. They could have said it here, but had I said it here, it would have made this abstract extremely complicated for you. So I'm just mentioning it, but it's not in the text to make life easier for your eyes. So it doesn't become Ania's text, which is convoluted, complex, and way beyond AMG 506. It is just sort of plain and nice. Now, this person, he in his study should have done all these things as described here, but by all means, ignore it. This is just way too much. So for your assignment 1, you just need to identify what exactly you will be investigating, right? And how exactly you will be systematizing your literature review. So you just do the one step only. You don't do all of the steps, because this is more than a PhD, or at least a PhD scope. Resolution. So what happened? You did all of that. What happened? Findings of the study will be reported, and the moral, and so will be the moral, right? So, and implications for future, right? Implications for the future will be drawn. So we can write it here. Implications for future will be drawn. Now you don't have them yet because that's later on in your in the process of your assignment writing. But that's what the resolution is about, and what's the moral about, right? What's the implications, and what's that? Okay, well, I'll close it for now. It's 1 hour, maybe just as well, but I didn't record the collaborate session because I was able to say it faster and maybe cleaner in a sense. So I will advise also our students who were present at the collaborate session to maybe review this recording as well. It's good for everybody, and it was very good for me also to actually say it in such a compact way. You see, we always learn. So I will enjoy the semester. Hope you will too, and I will see you either online or via emails. Okay, thank you so much.